Okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Today, I'm going to try to teach you guys a little bit about Congress and how Congress operates and what its powers are and who is in the leadership and so forth. And then I got a really easy activity for you to do where you're going to sort out the differences between the House and the Senate, what they can do and what their powers are, okay? So first thing is, let me share my screen with you and we'll go over Congress. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? Okay, just remember, as I'm going through this, if you have questions, you can unmute yourself and just ask them, or you could throw them in the chat room. I think Miss J is going to be watching. Hopefully, if you could do that for me, Miss J, watch the chat room. Okay, so Congress, sometimes known as the legislative branch. Okay, the first thing we're going to take a look at is what are our goals. Okay, so this is the stuff we're going to learn for the next, you're going to learn for the next couple of weeks. How they're elected, how members of Congress are elected. We're going to look at the structure, leadership, and powers of Congress. That's mainly what we're going to be doing today. We're going to construct the lawmaking process. You're going to figure out how a bill becomes a law, which is something that is a lot more complicated than you would think. We're going to compare the House and the Senate. You're going to do that today. And then finally, investigate the current congressional document. So you'll pick a law before Congress and we'll do some research and tell me what's going on with that. Okay. All right. So first thing is, what does Congress do? Who's got an answer to that question? What does Congress do? Anybody?
I'm right, but I'm assuming they like help pass laws, right?
Yes. So bills are introduced into Congress and they pass them. Now, does the exact same version of, before it goes to the president, I need you to realize it has to be the exact same version, the exact same bill. So like all the words have to be the same. All the sections have to be the same. There can't be, extra or quotation marks or semicolons or anything like that. It has to be the exact same bill. So what is the president's role in this? It's not a law until the president does something. What does the president have to do?
Veto it.
The president can veto it. There's two choices when the same bill passes both houses of Congress, the House and the Senate, it goes to the president. And one of the things the president can do is veto it. If he vetoes it, what is he saying about the law? I should say the bill.
He's rejecting it.
He's rejecting it. And that can be overridden by 2/3 of Congress. But 9 times out of 10, what does the president do when it comes across his or her desk? In order for it to become a law, what does the president have to do? Anybody?
Does he have to pass it?
He'll sign it.
He'll sign it.
And that turns the bill into a law. Okay. But there's a couple of other things that Congress does as well. They not only debate and pass bills, but they also investigate. So if it's a law that's already been passed, whether it was last year or 40 years ago, if it's still on the books, they're allowed to investigate what's going on with that law to make sure that it, is operating the way it's supposed to. So they have investigation powers as well. Okay, now, this is what you're going to focus on your activity today. Okay, what are the differences between the House and the Senate? Okay, let's run down the House here. Okay, the House has people are elected for a 2-year term. So there's 435 members. They each represent a district. And the districts are supposed to be, that's why I have proportional representation here. They're supposed to be about equal in size. And I think they're about 800,000 people citizens in a member of Congress's district, House district. Okay, so they served a 2-year term. So just last November, a few weeks ago, all 435 members were up for re-election at the same time. Okay, so every 2 years there's a new House of Representatives. They initiate all money bills. So any kind of taxing, any bill that spends money or collects money has to start in the House of Representatives, which are most of the bills. Okay, very few bills don't collect or spend money. So almost every bill starts in the House of Representatives. Okay, and the House also initiates impeachment proceedings. Okay, now I want to clarify this for you guys because we've had 3 presidents be impeached in our history. And by the way, judges can be impeached. Federal judges can be impeached and removed. President Trump was impeached. What does it mean to be impeached? Who's got that one? Who's got an answer to that? What does it mean if a federal official, including the president, is impeached?
It's when they have charges brought against them.
Yeah, so I heard a couple things there. It was the president's brought up on charges. It's almost like a grand jury saying, okay, we are officially charging the president with these high crimes and misdemeanors. Okay, then it goes to the Senate. The Senate holds a trial. So the Senate holds impeachment trials. And if the president is found guilty by 2/3 of the Senate, then they're kicked out of office. That's never happened. We've had 3 presidents be impeached. Trump won his impeachment trial by a lot. So the Senate rejected the impeachment of the president. Same thing with President Clinton. But the guy that came the closest was Andrew Johnson. He was a president after Lincoln was assassinated. He stayed in office by 1 vote. Had one person switch their vote from not guilty to guilty, he would have been removed from office. So we've never had that before. Okay. All right. The Senate, they serve 6-year terms. Okay. And they're divided up into thirds. So last month when we had our national election, 1/3 of the Senate, so roughly 33 of them were up for re-election. Okay. 2 years from now, there'll be another 1/3. Those folks were elected in 2016. Okay, so in 2022, they were up for re-election. And then after that, the people that were elected in 2018, they'll be up for re-election in 2022. So they scatter these terms. There's 100 members in the Senate. Okay, 2 per state. We have 50 states. That's 100 senators. One thing that the Senate can do that the House doesn't do is offer advice and consent on appointments and treaties. So you'll see this when Joe Biden takes office in January, on January 20th. So in the weeks after that, he'll say, this is my pick for Secretary of State. This is my pick for the person to be the Secretary of Defense. This is the Homeland Security Director and so forth. And the Senate has to approve those appointments. Okay, so just because Biden says I want this person to be Secretary of State, they're not Secretary of State until the Senate gives it a majority vote on that. And 9 times out of 10, they always do. They figure, let's just give the president, whoever the president wants to be, to have as advisors, let's just go ahead and give that to them. Okay, but also judges, federal judges, trial, appeals, and Supreme Court judges are appointed by the president and then approved by the Senate. That's a little more controversial. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the judicial branch in about a month. Okay, any questions so far? Nope. Okay, so as far as how the House and the Senate operate, okay, the House, since there's 435 of them, the leader of the House of Representatives, their official title is Speaker of the House. It's Nancy Pelosi. We'll get to that in a couple minutes. She has to exert strong leadership because there's so many members. Imagine running a school that has, 100 students versus a school that has, 435 people. It's a lot harder to run something the more people that there is. Okay, so they're more centralized. They operate in committees a lot. So committees are really, really important in the House of Representatives. And committees are smaller sections of representatives. The Senate does it as well. So, and these committees will specialize in something. So there's a Foreign Services Committee or a a taxing committee or a education committee. So any bill that's introduced in the House or the Senate, if it's an education bill, it'll go to the education committee first. It has to get out of that committee before it can be voted on by the entire House or the entire Senate. Okay. The most important committee in the House is called the Rules Committee. Okay. The Speaker of the House is in charge of the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee does exactly what it seems like. They make the rules for the House of Representatives. That's what makes the Speaker so very powerful. And by the way, the Speaker of the House is also third in line to the presidency too. Okay, so if something were to happen to the president and the vice president, the Speaker of the House would become acting president. Okay, the House, they're allowed to add germane amendments. Germane is kind of another word for small. So the amendments have to be related to the bill. So if it's an education bill, if they make an amendment to the bill, it has to be something about education. Okay. Committee work, like I said before, committee work is really most important in the House of Representatives. Floor debate is less important. They do most of their work in the committees. They do a lot less work on the actual House floor. In fact, when I went and visited, I took my kids to Washington, D.C. in 2011, and we saw the opening of the House of Representatives. It was really cool. We saw they read the prayer to start the House of Representatives session. We did the Pledge of Allegiance. And then they started debate, and there was hardly anybody there. There was only there's 435 people. I'm not kidding. There was about 10 representatives there. And one of my kids leaned over. They're like, "Dad, where is everybody? How come this place is so empty?" And I told him that they're all in their committees. That's where they do most of their work. Okay. The Senate, on the other hand, when they meet as a body, almost everybody is there. Okay. So they do a lot of stuff on the floor as an entire Senate. They still do committee work, but it's not as important in the House of Representatives. Okay. So they're less centralized. The leader of the Senate is the majority leader, the majority party leader. That is Mitch McConnell. You've probably seen him. If you watch the news, you've definitely seen him on the news a lot. He's a pretty powerful person. So is Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Okay, so there's a lot more personal interaction between the senators because they tend to meet as an entire body. Debate usually lasts a lot longer in the Senate because it takes something called cloture to end a debate. That's 60 senators. Right now, the Senate is split. The Republicans have a numerical majority in the Senate. Not by much. I think it's 52-48. Might be 53-47. So if they want to close debate, on something, the parties have to work together because not one party together has 60 senators. So they got to work together. Now there's a special debate called a filibuster, and you guys may have questions about this. I find this to be fascinating, filibusters. The way you can only do this in the Senate. You can't do this in the House. A filibuster in the Senate, the way it works is somebody basically goes up to the speaker platform and talks and talks and talks. I compare it to throwing a temper tantrum. Not that any of you students ever did that when you were little kids. I'm sure you were perfect, but you've seen kids throw temper tantrums. They're trying to get their way. Senators, I'm not calling them big babies, but they basically talk and talk until they get their way. So a filibuster would be used to either stop a vote on a bill or to add something in a bill, add an amendment to a bill. So it's not used too often, but to stop a filibuster, 60 senators need to vote. And as long as that person is filibustering, they're holding up the entire work, the official work of the Senate. Okay. And these have gone on for hours. Now, before I tell you how long the longest filibuster was, I want you guys to think, how long could you continually talk? And by the way, you're allowed to, I think you're allowed, Miss J, you said this before in previous classes, you can bring like something to drink up with you, but you don't want to drink too much, because if you drink too much, what's going to happen? You got to go to the bathroom. And if you leave the podium to go to the bathroom, your filibuster's done. You have to stay there and continually talk, because as soon as you can't talk anymore or you run out of things to say, your filibuster's over. Okay. Now, the rules of the Senate are you have to talk about whatever the bill is for an hour. Then after that, you can talk about anything you want. Now, knowing that, I want to ask you guys, what's the longest that you can talk? You think you could talk for an hour straight or two? And by the way, you're not allowed to, have anything to eat either. So anyway, the the longest debate in, I'm sorry, the longest filibuster in Senate history is 24 hours and almost 30 minutes. That's an entire day. Do you think you could talk for an entire day? That is crazy.
So it's literally about, you can literally talk about anything after that hour.
After that hour, you can talk about anything. And the guy that did the longest filibuster, his name was Strom Thurmond. He was a senator from South Carolina. They were trying to pass it was 1957. It was a Civil Rights Act. And he was a segregationist senator. He didn't believe in integration. So he wanted to, he felt this bill was wrong. So he talked about the bill for an hour. Then after that, he had his staff bring over phone books from the Library of Congress. And he just opened up the phone book from whatever town and started reading names and phone numbers. So as long as he talked about the bill for an hour, he could speak and do whatever, say whatever he wanted to. There's a current senator named Ted Cruz. He's from Texas. He's a pretty good filibuster. I think he's got 2 or 3 of the longest filibusters in Senate history. But he has little kids, and he decided he reads Green Eggs and Ham to them every night, the book Green Eggs and Ham. So he felt bad that he couldn't do that night because he was filibustering. So as part of his filibuster, he read Green Eggs and Ham. And if you don't believe me, you can go on YouTube and find it. Just search Ted Cruz, Green Eggs and Ham, and you'll see him reading that as part of his filibuster. I think he went on for 8 hours. That's pretty crazy. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so these are the things that the president does. A couple of things that students get confused over are, we talked about confirmation power. Let's work backwards. Confirmation powers, consensus building. That's important because you need to get, if you have a bill that you want passed, you have to get people build a consensus, an agreement around it. Oversight authority. They can examine laws that they've already passed and make sure that they can hold hearings to make sure that they're operating, the laws are operating the way that they're supposed to. And we talked about lawmaking. Now let's talk about these things. A representative, what are their functions? Okay. This is confusing, delegate versus trustee. I found over the years that students get kind of confused about that. Okay. And I have a couple questions about that on your Congress test. Okay. So if you're a delegate, okay, if somebody is a representative and they see themselves as a delegate, their view is that they represent every person in their district. Okay. So somebody who feels like they're a delegate, what they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, before I vote on this bill, let me check with my voters. Let me check with my district. And they figure out what their district, what a majority of the people in their district, how they want them to vote. Okay. So they feel like they're representing a majority of the people. Okay. A trustee doesn't do that. A trustee feels like they represent a viewpoint. If it's a conservative Republican, they feel like, okay, I have to vote as a conservative Republican all the time. Or if they're a liberal Democrat, they'll say, I have to vote the way, liberals vote on these bills. Okay, so that's the difference between a delegate and a trustee. So a trustee represents a viewpoint, whereas a delegate would represent the entire district. Okay, and then there's pork barrel and log rolling. Okay, these are things. Pork barrel is a term that's used to it's things, it's spending that's thrown in a bill to get a senator to vote for it. They can't do this in the House of Representatives. Well, they sort of can do this in the House of Representatives, because remember that the amendments in the House of Representatives, if somebody adds an amendment to a bill, it has to be actually related to the bill. In the Senate, they can add something that has nothing to do with the bill. So let's say they're passing an education bill, and they need one more vote, and they need a senator from Kentucky to vote for this bill. Well, they might go to that senator to Kentucky and say, what do we need? You know, we need to get you to vote for this bill. And that senator from Kentucky will say, all right, well, here's what I need. I need $850 million to repair the bridge, the I-75 bridge between Kentucky and Ohio. Okay, and they'll go ahead and put that in there. That's allowed in the Senate. That's called, oops, I started over here. Okay, so that's called pork barrel legislation. Log rolling is kind of like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So log rolling would be, you know, you come to somebody and say, hey, I need your vote for my bill. And then that person turns around and says, okay, I'll vote for your bill if you vote for my bill. That's log rolling. So there's a lot of deal making that goes along. It mainly happens in the Senate more than in the House of Representatives. Okay.
How is the first one not counted as a bribe, though?
It is a bribe, but it's a legal bribe. So you can see that as a bribe, and you know, it is. It's, what can I do to get you to vote for this bill? But it's a legal bribe. That's different from throwing money, you know, I guess the difference is, you know, that bridge, I guess a direct bribe would be that senator gets $100,000 to vote for the bill. He pockets that money and can do whatever he wants or she wants with it. At least with this, you know, if they decide, well, okay, we'll throw this bridge funding in with the education bill, at least, you know, people in Kentucky and Ohio and people all over the United States that use Interstate 75 would benefit from that. Okay, does that make sense? So bribes are really seen as really impacting one person, where I guess this is kind of a bribe, but it's, you know, a lot of people benefit from that. Okay, now how am I doing on time? We've got, what time is class over?
14 minutes.
14 minutes. Okay, I'm going to go a little longer and then I'll explain your assignment to you. Was that you, Francis? Thank you. Okay. Let's look at the leadership of the House and the Senate. Okay, these are the two big. Now it's weird because the Senate is different from the House in some ways. In some ways, they're similar. Okay, the person that leads the House of Representatives is the Speaker of the House. They are elected by both the Democrats and the Republicans in the House. They're caucus. When you say caucus, you mean actually just, you know, the Republicans will meet together or the Democrats will meet together, and they put somebody forth to run for Speaker of the House. So the Democrats will say, Nancy Pelosi is our candidate for Speaker of the House, which they did a couple of weeks ago, and she's been reelected as the as the Speaker of the House for the next term that starts on January 9th. Okay, why does she win? Anybody know why she won? There's a really simple answer to this question. Why does anybody win an election? Because they get the most what?
Votes.
They get the most votes. Why did she get the most votes? Which party is in control numerically of the House of Representatives? Anybody know?
Party caucus.
It's actually the Democratic Party has a numerical majority in the House of Representatives. Whoever has the numerical majority in the House always elects their candidate as Speaker of the House. Okay, so if it was reversed, if the Republicans were in control, this guy Kevin McCarthy would be the the Speaker of the House. But since the Democrats control numerically, they have the most people in the House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi got elected. Okay, Kevin McCarthy, he's called the minority leader, and if you look at the picture of him, you can clearly see he is not a minority. He's a white male, but he's the minority leader because his party is in the minority. Okay, so her job, Nancy Pelosi's job, is to make sure that legislation gets passed. Kevin McCarthy's job is the opposition, is to make sure that legislation doesn't get passed unless his party's in favor of it. Okay, so I'm going to skip their duties and move on to who are the minority leaders and whips. The majority leader of the, so Nancy Pelosi is in charge of, I won't go back, but Nancy Pelosi is in charge of the entire House of Representatives. Steny Hoyer, he's the majority leader of the Democratic Party. He's in charge of the Democratic Party. These guys are the whips. Now, they literally don't whip people, but their job is to make sure. So if the Democrats say, we want this coronavirus relief bill passed, it's James Clyburn. He's the majority whip. It's his job to count the votes, to make sure that all the Democrats vote for that. And if Steve Scalise, who is the Republican, so he's the minority leader, he would make sure that his party doesn't vote for that. Or if it's something his party wants passed, he would get them to vote his way. Okay, and in the Senate, the official president of the Senate, according to the Constitution, is the vice president. So right now, it's Mike Pence. Okay, but Mike Pence, the vice president, has very little power in the Senate. The only power that the vice president has is to cast a tie-breaking vote. So if it's a 50-50 tie in the Senate, and they think it's going to be a 50-50 tie, they'll make a call over to the White House and say, send the vice president over. We're going to need his vote to break the tie. Okay. So the vice president cannot participate in debates. The only thing even though he's the president of the Senate, the only thing he can do is cast a tie-breaking vote. Okay, so he does not spend hardly any time at the Senate unless they're opening the session or they need him to cast a tie-breaking vote. Okay, the president pro tempore, the temporary president of the Senate, is this guy, Chuck Grassley. Okay, now this is a ceremonial post. This is kind of like being the Queen of England or the king of a country in a constitutional monarchy. Okay, he's a regular senator, so he can participate in the Senate debates and votes and so forth, but it's a ceremonial post. It's always given to the longest serving majority party member. So whoever's in the majority party in the Senate, that's the Republicans. Okay, he is the guy that's been there the longest. He's been in the Senate. He's been a senator since 1980. I'm 52. That's when I was 12. So that's how long he's been in the Senate. That's, what is that, 40 years? That's a long time. So that's a ceremonial post. But the real leader of the Senate is this guy, Mitch McConnell. He's the majority leader, and he is an extremely powerful person, just like Nancy Pelosi in Washington, D.C. I would put them as almost as powerful as the president of the United States. Okay, McConnell is the majority leader, so he's a Republican. His job is just like the Speaker of the House. He determines the rules. His committee helps him determine the rules. They're the ones that set the legislative agenda. What bills get voted on, what bills don't get voted on. And the guy that's the opposite of him is Chuck Schumer. He's a Democrat from New York. He's the minority party leader. So I don't know if you've been following the news, but we don't know which party is going to be in control of the Senate in the next session that starts on January 9th. Does anybody know the story behind that? What's going to determine who has control of the Senate? Anybody been following the news enough to know that? Okay, it's actually in Georgia. There's two Senate races in Georgia that haven't been determined. They're in runoff elections now. If the Republican wins one or both, the Republicans will have the majority in the in the Senate. If the Democratic candidate wins both, if the Democrats win both of those seats, they become the majority. So that's that's going to make a big determination on the kind of things that the Biden administration can get done. Because if the Republicans are in control of the Senate, they're not going to vote for his agenda. If the Democrats are in control of the Senate, then the Democrats will be in control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, which then, Biden's agenda will probably cruise through the House and the Senate at that point. Okay. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is, Francis, you're the timekeeper. How much time do I have left?
Like 6 minutes.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to explain an assignment that I want you guys to do. It's a pretty simple assignment. You can start on it now. It'll probably take you about 5 minutes or so. Okay. So let me pull up the activity. I'm going to share my screen again.
Is it the Desmos one?
Yeah, it's a Desmos one. I think some of you have done that already. So you'll go to Desmos. There's a link to it on Classroom. And it's basically a card sort. So what you're going to do is, it is House versus Senate. And it takes you right to this Desmos activity. Sign in with your Northwest account. Okay, and make sure your name pops up. And there's two categories, House and the Senate. Okay, and you're going to take all the rest of these and put it under the correct part of Congress. Okay, 100 members, I'll give you that one. That's the United States Senate. 435 members, where's it at right here? That's the House of Representatives. Okay, so whichever of these 2-year terms, that's the House and so forth. But when you're finished with this, it'll save automatically for you. Whatever your last screen is when you log off, it saves a screenshot automatically for you. So you don't have to worry about saving it. So don't look for a save button. And I can see what your last screen was. So I'll be able to grade it from there. Okay, it's a 20-point assignment. So make sure you get that done. Okay, any questions about today?
No.
You guys are all good? Okay, all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop class now. You can stick around and ask questions if you want, or you can go on to your 6th bell. Okay, now tomorrow is normal cohort, except you're learning from home. Don't forget that. And I haven't heard yet if we're going to be back in school on Monday or not. We're supposed to know by Thursday. So once I find out, I'll post something on Classroom for you guys. Okay.
Okay.